Well, good evening once again. This is the BALI Speakers Forum, and I am very excited tonight to have gotten Jessyn Farrell to talk to us. The broad topic is bravery is a muscle and other lessons I've learned from politics. And I've been thinking about that. Bravery is a muscle, and that's really good. It's something that you have to exercise, and I think the more you exercise it, the stronger it gets. It's really something that I can learn. So, Jessyn is an attorney. She got her law degree. She's a leader in building public consensus on difficult issues related to the environment, housing, transportation, and the economy. A longtime environmental advocate, Jessyn's careers span the public, private, nonprofit, and philanthropic sectors. As a state legislator, Jessyn passed groundbreaking legislation on oil rail safety, affordable housing near transit centers, education funding for low income and homeless youth, protection for pregnant workers, and restrictions to cell phone use while driving. Those are some pretty amazing things. And Jessyn has been at the heart of all of it. She also led advocacy efforts resulting in billions of dollars in regional light rail investments as executive director of Transportation Choices Coalition. Currently, she's director of the Office of Sustainability and Environment for the city of Seattle, working for her recent opponent for the mayoral position, Bruce Harrell. And she has 3 kids, a dog, a cat who may appear this evening, and is working on her first book. Jessyn, please tell us all about it.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Stu, and thank you everyone for being here. I thought what I'd do is tell a few stories and share a few insights, and then we can just open it up for questions. So it can be an ask me anything kind of session after I've shared some thoughts, including bravery as a muscle. And Stu, you set that up really well. I mean, the spoiler alert is that you have to practice and you get better at it as you practice. But I thought because this is a Bet Olive group, I actually would start by just talking about my spiritual journey and how that has impacted my political journey, and then share 3 lessons from politics that kind of stem from my own life experiences. So I'm just going to jump in and start with that I was raised, I had a very unusual religious background. So I grew up in what I like to call an evangelical Buddhist household. And that is to say that my parents belonged to a Buddhist sect called the Soka Gakkai. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they the lay organization came about in Japan in the 1930s to fight the militarization of Japan and the dictatorship of Tojo. And there was a really strong, overt peace movement element to it. And then after the war, a really strong opposition to nuclear war, obviously with the impact in Japan, but also this really strong proselytizing element. And so I grew up in a household where we did what was called shakabukuing, where we would literally go out on the streets of Seattle in the late 1970s and early 80s and tell people about Buddhism. And one of the reasons I probably have such a high tolerance for public life is because of these early efforts trying to tell people about this kind of Buddhism. And it culminated when I was 12 and I was put on a bus with other children belonging to the Soka Gakkai. And we were driven down to Portland, where we were dressed up as American pilgrims with little hats and buckles on our shoes. And we had to stand on a street corner at the height of puberty as a 12-year-old, dressed as a pilgrim. But the saving grace is that Patrick Duffy from Dallas was there too, because he was also a member of the Soka Gakkai. And so there we were, handing out leaflets about this practice. And I guess I became good at walking up to people and talking to them at an early age. So in some ways there were really positive things about growing up in this really kind of outsider or organization, this, being able to talk to anyone about anything, and this real commitment to world peace. We don't talk about that much anymore as a movement, but maybe we should do that more. But there were also things that were really challenging about it. In Northeast Seattle in the 70s, there were not a lot of other people who were members of the Soka Gakkai, and I was regularly ostracized by kids on the playground. There were families that wouldn't let their children play with me. My brother and I were called devil worshippers. And I, really experienced what it means to feel like a real outsider. And, that ostracism at a young age really kind of stays with you in a lot of ways. And growing up, we had a very close set of family friends who were Jewish. And so we spent a lot of time at Seder's and celebrating with them. And I was really drawn to it because of this sense of community and, just so many beautiful parts of it. In college, I decided to really explore converting. And as part of that path, I read The Jew and the Lotus. And I was like, this is great, because I want to be the lotus and the Jew. Instead of being a Jew boo, I'm kind of a boo Jew. So this is perfect. And actually first came to Bet Aleph in 1997 or 8, where there was a screening of The Jew and the Lotus. And that's how I first came across Bet Aleph. But I moved to the East Coast and found a conservative shul in Northampton that I converted with, and ended up working for a Reconstructionist rabbi named Sheila Weinberg, who's also a well-known teacher of meditation, and kind of made my way in the world. So that's a little bit about how I came to Bet Aleph, how I came to this moment. In fact, without all of those experiences, I wouldn't be here right now. And so, the theme of my talk is really going to be about how my spiritual journey and my political journey have intersected and connected, and how this practice of being Jewish and being Buddhist has really impacted my approach to politics. So I am going to spend a little time also talking about my political journey and how I kind of came to be in that world as well. Another really formative experience when I was young is that I was born with a hole in my heart the size of a quarter. So I was very deeply, really immobile for my first 7 years of my life. I couldn't run, I couldn't walk, I couldn't keep up with my younger brother, I couldn't keep up with other kids on the playground. I was known as a blue baby. Maybe some of you have heard of that. The birth defect is called tetralogy of Fallot. And in the 70s, it was still a really big deal to have open heart surgery. But eventually I did have heart surgery at Seattle Children's Hospital, and grew up to become, a strong person that could breathe and run and do all those things that healthy people can do, and just have always had this profound sense of gratitude for just being able to be, because it was so hard to be those first 7 years of my life. And I think that those two things, being in this kind of really outsider religious background, and then also having this really profound disability as a small child, really led me to want to fight to make things better, and always was really interested in politics, and in fact was voted most likely to become a politician as a high school senior. And then I grew up and did it. But like a lot of women, especially, 20 years ago and beyond, felt like I needed to get experience, that I couldn't just go into politics, that I, needed to get credentials to be taken seriously. And, went to law school and got into environmental advocacy and found myself advocating in the state legislature for more transit, a lot of men my age, but no women in the Washington state legislature. And so decided in 2012 that we needed moms with kids in the legislature making these important decisions. And so ran for office when I was, the mother of a young, of a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and then had the privilege of getting to be in the legislature for 5 years. And it was a really wonderful experience. And I'm actually going to share my screen and show one picture here. You have to make me a meeting host. So please do that.
Okay.
Here we go. So I'm gonna do a little bragging here for a moment. So here we go.
Okay, you should be able to do that.
Okay, so this is me. I was the first woman in 25 years in the Democratic Party in the legislature to have a baby. And this was me getting to bring baby Julian onto the House floor. And he's obviously very adorable. But what's interesting is that before this moment where you can see me smiling and bringing my baby, I was outside. I don't know if you've been to Olympia, you can hit a like button on your screen. But there are these big marble halls, and this was actually the first day of session in 2015. 2015. And we were all waiting to be able to march in. And right before the doors threw open, the speaker's attorney came in and told me that babies were not allowed on the House floor, and that I was going to have to find somebody to hold my baby or else not get sworn in that day. And I just looked at them and was like, you know what? The people of the 46th district knew I had this baby when they elected me. And if you don't figure this out, I am absolutely going to go to the media, because this is the most nonsensical thing I've ever heard in my life. It's 2015 and you can't bring a baby onto the House floor. So they immediately halted all of the proceedings and convened an emergency rule meeting between the House Republicans and the House Democrats to change the rule in that moment. So everybody was pacing outside, wondering what was going to happen. And the amazing thing is that they changed the rule. And then minutes later, I was able to bring Julian onto the House floor with me. And so there he is. And, kind of the amazing thing about that story is, first of all, like, wow, 2015, we're still having this conversation. But what it really meant is that all the other legislators could also bring their role as a caregiver to their job. And a Republican from Kitsap, his daughter had had a baby that session. And so he was able to bring his grandchild to the House floor and take care of his baby as well, his daughter's baby. And it just, it really strikes me that, kind of the lesson, I guess, lesson number one for everyone is, number one, we are all caregivers in some way. And that we need to bring that to the work that we do every single day, that notion of being a caregiver. And number two, that when we are really focusing on providing support to mothers and babies, we can do that in a way that actually provides support to everybody in their own caregiver role. And that this really influenced, I got to help pass Washington's paid family leave law. And one of the things we fought really hard for was to make sure that any caregiver could take time to take care of your parents or your siblings or your family members in some other way, because we are all caregivers. So that's lesson number one, that we are all caregivers, and that I hope we can all show up that way. The second story I'm going to tell is about polishing your inner mirror. So this is where I get to bring out the Buddhist in me and the idea of polishing your inner mirror. And the kind of setup for this story is we all have, looked on as politicians have said something horrible, the gaffe. And my contention, having been in the hot seat, is that often people are making gaffes when their mask comes off and they're saying what they really think. And so my advice to anyone out there who wants to be a politician is that you better polish what is inside so that when that mask comes off, you aren't ashamed of whatever might come out, and that having a practice of self-reflection really matters, because you are under so much pressure, that you are tired, you are sleepless, you're getting asked hard questions, there's a lot of conflict. And so being able to have that practice of looking inward really, really matters in such an outward facing job. And I'll tell a very specific story about that. So I have gotten to participate in the BALI meditation retreat with Stu and others who are probably watching. And in one session, I think this was 2017, I remember actually very clearly. It was 2017. It was right after Trump had been elected, and I was heartbroken. And I guess we should all note it's only gotten a lot worse to remember how things have progressed. But I was heartbroken and needed to really have that time in retreat and taking some time to be reflective. And I had this meditation where I was sitting in the palm of the source's hand with my grandmother. And as I was sitting in the palm of the source, I found myself inviting all of my legislative colleagues to sit with me. And one by one, I invited them all, and they all came, and we sat there in this very blissful state together, meditating and being full of equanimity. Well, the retreat ended, and it was time to go back to Olympia, where there's not a lot of equanimity. And in fact, I had introduced a bill to protect women, to protect pregnant workers. But before 2017, you could actually get fired in Washington State if you were pregnant. And for needing to go to a doctor's appointment and having to miss work, for needing to have water on the job, for needing to sit in a chair while you were checking out at the grocery. And so I sent out an email to all of my colleagues inviting them to sign on to this bill. And I think it was no mistake that it was really literally just a few days after Trump was elected, because the Republicans felt emboldened. And one of the Republicans sent an email to the entire House, to all of the legislative staff, calling me a baby killer. And we all know that that has anti-Semitic connotations. It, it was very offensive and hurtful and shocking, because there is actually a very strong culture of decorum in the state legislature. You do not call people names. When you're speaking to someone on the floor, you don't even refer to them by their names. You don't say Representative Farrell. You say the good lady from the 46th district. So there are these very deeply held rules that are maybe archaic, but actually serve their purpose. And so you had this Republican legislator, this young guy, 15 years younger than I was, calling me a baby killer simply because I'd sent an email asking my colleagues to sign on to this bill to protect pregnant women and pregnant workers. And it was a massive firestorm. And the media contacted me and wanted to get a statement and wanted me to put up my dukes and fight. And I thought to myself of this feeling that I had had only a few days before, of sitting with my colleagues in the palm of, the source's hand, And I thought, all right, I am going to sit on this for a weekend. And hopefully this person has any sense of conscience, and he can sweat it out for the weekend, wondering what is going to happen to him. And then when we come back on Monday, he can come into my office and apologize to my face. And I think that's probably the best way to make my point. And, rather than going on, KUOW and having a big thing in the paper, we're going to have a private conversation in my office about what that felt like and how we're going to be able to work together in the future. And so he sweated it out over the weekend. And at 8 a.m. on Monday morning, he had to come to my office. And to his credit, he apologized. And we had a really great conversation. And we're able to work together. We didn't agree on basically anything, but we were able to sit next to each other in committee. We were able to sit next to each other in the lunchroom. We were able to talk to each other and disagree with civility. And that goes back to this practice of having some self-reflection, and how important it is for politicians who are constantly pressured to be outward facing and reactive. And so I am grateful to be a part of this community and have that. And so the last lesson is bravery is a muscle. And as we've already talked a little bit about, it really is a muscle and it needs to be used. And I love the definition of bravery as being, acting even when you're scared and doing something that you need to do anyway. And the story here is I was working on the 2015 transportation package that authorized Sound Transit 3 and all of this brand new money for other kinds of transportation projects around the state. And, politicians love to bring home all the goodies. They love those ribbon cuttings. Like it was a big, huge fest of, lots of stuff for everybody's district. And this was when the legislature was still divided. So it was, the Senate was in control of the Republicans, the House was in control of by the Democrats. And so it had been a big ordeal to get to a place where there was a very uneasy consensus around what was going to be in the package, what policy changes were going to be made. And I had worked really hard to make that happen. And I had that baby. You guys all saw little baby Julian. And every single day I showed up at that job, kind of fighting to get there, and then going home every night to be with the baby, and sometimes bringing the baby down there. Julian came with me a lot that session once he was allowed on the House floor. And so it was a big multi-year process to get to a degree of consensus. And I, end of the day, looked like there was a deal. And as I was driving home, or late at night, I guess, late at night, I found out that once I had left campus, a deal had been cut to take $500 million out of the Sound Transit funding, which of course I cared a lot about, and use it to plug a hole in the general fund. And I was devastated by that. It was not the, deal that I had left at the day, at the end of the day. And it meant that, like taxpayers in the Puget Sound region were suddenly going to be filling holes to cover prisons in Clallam Bay and Walla Walla and, who knows what. And it just seemed patently unfair, like one of those dirty deals that, we'll just take $500 million in transit funding when nobody's looking, and we'll plug this hole over here and we'll call it good. And I was furious and had to start to come to terms with having to vote no for the package. And I will just say, as a legislator, I was always really frustrated by what I called the noble no. Voting no on something, but the bad thing still happened anyway, and so you got to have kind of this self-righteous, like, I'm voting no, but the bad policy would go forward anyway. And that bothered me. So when I woke up in that morning, I decided, you know what? I have a legislative play, and I'm going to play this and we're going to just see what happens. So I put 2 amendments on the bar, and that's literally the rostrum at the front of the House. You have to turn in your amendments. And the 2 amendments were, number 1, to keep the $500 million in the Puget Sound region. But I knew some of the Democrats were really worried about education funding shortfalls. So to keep that $500 million for the most vulnerable youth in King, Pierce, and Snohomish County, for, homeless youth and youth who had been incarcerated and foster youth. So everyone could have a path to getting to yes. They could vote for this amendment to keep the money in my taxpayers' pocket, in my taxpayers' region, but go towards the things that Democrats are concerned about. Or the nuclear option, which I guess is a good pacifist Buddhist, I shouldn't use that phrase, but I'm going to, which would be to put an amendment on the entire transportation package that would put it to the voters in November. And I knew all of the Republicans would vote with me to do that. I couldn't count on the Democrats to vote with me because sometimes they don't do what we want them to do. But I knew the Republicans could not turn down the chance of putting something to the voters where it would actually get voted down, because it was an off-year election. And so I had 49 votes plus me, and I needed to convince one other Democrat to hang with me through this. And I found Senator Stanford from Bothell was true blue throughout all of this. And so I put these 2 amendments on the bar, and I went and promptly hid in the bathroom because what I was doing was so transgressive, to basically blow up a $20 billion deal and not go along, get along. And it was a really big deal. And now the key here, though, is that there was the path where everything got blown up. And then there was the path where we could get to yes. And I could vote with my conscience and vote with my voters in mind. But it was very, very scary. And I put those 2 things on, and I turned off my phone, and I hid in the bathroom. And all the rest of the day, I was getting, calls from the governor, calls from Microsoft, calls from, all of the major powers in our state, trying to convince me to stand down. And I just hid in the bathroom and exercised that little muscle of bravery and was like, nope, there's a path to get to yes, and it is a good path that you all should get on. Or no, I am not doing this, and I'm not going to let this happen. And to make a long story short, by the end of the day, there had been enough tempest in the legislature, and people finally came around. I got folks like Ross Hunter and others to kind of come around and help negotiate a deal and get the Republican Senate to agree, and to get the Speaker of the House to agree, and others. And so the good news about that is once I exercised that muscle, it got a lot easier. Nothing bad happened. And in fact, something really good happened. And now we have this $500 million fund that comes into King County and Pierce County and Snohomish County to help support really vulnerable kids. And so exercising our bravery muscles is really important, especially in this era of a lot of uncertainty. So that concludes my lessons from politics. Bravery is a muscle, polish your inner mirror, and we are all caregivers, and that we need to bring that part of ourselves to our work and to everything that we do. And so I would love to answer some questions. We're a small group on Zoom. I know that there are many of you who are going to watch it afterwards. But if, Kate and Stu and Jeannie and Rob and Barbara, if you guys would like to ask some questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Terrific. Just really, I loved your whole presentation. And I loved the tie-in, with your spiritual background. Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Jessyn, would you run through the logistics of your muscle play at the legislature? I wasn't sure if I understood the getting to yes and the nuclear option,
Yep.
could you run through that again?
Yep. Okay. So the way a big budget bill happens is usually the deal is struck, the bill reflecting the deal is written, and we vote on it really quickly, because usually there's compromises, and the longer everybody sits with those compromises, the longer they decide they don't like them, right? And so it usually happens really quickly. And so when I left, let's say it was Monday, there was what I thought was a deal. This poison pill was inserted, taking $500 million from taxpayers in King County. I was not going to stand for that. And I then had to decide whether I was going to vote for what then became the bill, as was, with all of this great stuff. I mean, there was a lot of good stuff for the 46th district. There was Sound Transit 3 authorization. There was all of this stuff that I worked really hard to get. But this thing that really just didn't sit well with me. Like, I don't think you can sell taxes to the voters when they don't get what they think they're paying for. And that it just undermined my whole notion of how we sell what we're doing, which is do what you say you're going to do. So I felt very strongly about that. So I thought about what I could do. And so there were two options. I put two amendments on the bar. And I basically threatened, if you can take this amendment, repurposing the $500 million and keeping it with the taxpayers who are raising their own taxes to fund, you know, stuff in their districts. So you can do that. And that's the pro-social way out of this, where everybody gets what they need. Or if you are not willing to do this, I am going to put this amendment on the bill that would basically what we call a referendum clause. And rather than enacting it into law, the legislature would send it to the voters. And it's hard to pass a big tax package in an off year because the electorate tends to be more conservative and anti-tax. And so I knew that this would crash the entire $20 billion package, plus the $60 billion Sound Transit 3 authorization that I really wanted. And I had to get 50 votes, 50 credible votes for the amendment on the referendum to hang, that's what we say, to hang on the underlying transportation package bill. And so I counted up my votes, and I knew that every single Republican was going to vote with me. And actually, I'm remembering now, there were 46 Republicans. There were 2 swing district Democrats that I knew the speaker would force to vote with the Republicans. So I had 48 votes. I had myself, and I needed one more vote. And that was where I went to now Senator Stanford and talked to him about this. And he felt strongly about it too, and was willing to take the heat with me. And there aren't a lot of friends in the legislature that will really stick it out. And everybody got a lot of pressure to just go along, get along, let the bill go, you know, historic transportation package, you got to do it. And so because those 50 votes were real, by the end of the day, as the powers that be in the legislature were kind of realizing, oh, she's not backing down, we're going to just have to take the other amendment, take the $500 million amendment. So I hope that kind of makes a little more sense.
So did you restore the bill to the way it was the day you left, or did you accept some compromise to it through your amendment?
Well, the bill that I left had a lot of compromises in it.
Sure.
There were lots of things that I did not like, but I was willing to get there because there was a lot of good stuff. And then this final thing was the straw that broke the camel's back. So when we finally took the package on the House floor, you take the underlying bill, then you put it on hold and you do all the amendments. And so we did that amendment. That was, usually you don't take amendments to a deal like that because it turns everything into chaos, as I kind of created a chaos. So we took my amendment and then we basically voted on the bill. There may have been some minor amendments, but that was the only big substantive amendment.
But did your amendment give away anything? I guess that's what I'm asking.
You know what it did is it met the values that were trying to be gotten with the original deal, but in a way that kept Puget Sound taxpayers whole, that met the concerns of Democrats by losing. There was a very complicated reason there was a $500 million hole in education funding. And so rather than putting it into the Olympia statewide budget, it would just keep it in. So it was crafted so that it met people's needs, and therefore was, I think, a really good compromise that people could get to yes to.
Okay, nice work.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
This is Jeannie. I have a question.
Yes.
I'm not good at looking at myself on the screen, so I'll talk to you this way.
That's fine. I know you're out there.
Yeah, okay. First of all, like Kate, I am quite impressed. I really was not expecting this. I was thinking we were going to get rules on how to do some other things, but you know, I just don't know how anyone goes into politics these days. I mean, I just find myself going, nope, would never do that for $1 million. You went in when you were really young, and I'm just curious. You've been in there how long now?
Well, I resigned the state legislature in 2017 to run for mayor. And
Okay.
then I didn't get enough. So I ran for mayor again in
Okay.
2021, this last year.
Okay.
Didn't win either time, but then went to work for one of my opponents. So I now work for the city of Seattle and I run the Office of Sustainability. And
So you're
Environment.
not in the legislature now?
I'm not. Nope.
Okay, okay. But how do you, as a new member of the legislature, how do you figure out how to play the game and how, I mean, some of it is very dense, and I can't imagine that you walk in understanding all of that. I mean, can you kind of talk a little bit about what it was like when you first started?
Yeah, that's a good question. I had a little bit of an advantage because I had worked in Olympia on transit issues as both at Washburg, at Transportation Choices Coalition, and then even at Pierce Transit, which is where I was during the Great Recession. That's a whole other story of having to work with the community to cut bus service by 30%. It was very devastating. But so I knew a little bit about how it works, and I guess what I'll say is another thing that really animates my approach to public policy and politics is having had the benefit of jazz education as a kid and as a teenager and a college student. And the reason is that, to me, like, politics at its best is the art of collectively solving problems without force, right? Like, that is how we do this. And actually, it's very vulnerable. And we can talk about how we're going to protect this project of solving problems collectively without force. And so anyway, what jazz and being an artist taught me, and that I use all the time, is how to listen.
Exactly.
And how to receive, like, listen within the deepest part, like, what are people saying under their words, and what is their heart saying?
Well, it's like improvising. Yeah, you've got to listen to the other. You can't just be out there by yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then you hear something and you put something back out.
Right.
And then you listen again and you refine it, and that's where you get the creativity part of public policy. And again, that $500 million amendment was about, hearing what my colleagues had been saying so that I could come up with a different way to get what we wanted, that also got what I wanted. And, like, to be really honest here, but hopefully working on behalf of my constituents, like, that was important. But
there were so many. How many were in the legislature?
So there are 98 in the House.
Okay.
And 49 in the Senate. that right?
Yeah, but you were you in the House or the
I
Senate?
was in the House, so I had to get
Okay.
50 votes. You have to know how to count. Like that's rule number one in the legislature is you need to count to 50, period. To do whatever you want to do, you have to be able to count votes. And that is absolutely about hearing what people are saying and then being creative around how you meet their needs. But it also means making power plays every once in a while.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Oh,
and
yeah.
kind of showing, you know what, I will rain on everybody's parade. So let's come back to the table and figure this out because this doesn't work yet. You know, so it's like that mixture of how do you create something that everybody wants to get to yes to, but also drawing a line and being very real and holding that line and not being scared of holding that line.
That's interesting. I worked for the city of Phoenix for 13, 15 years, and I was in the city clerk department. I was an IT person, but I was in the city, I was a deputy city clerk. And so we took care, if you will, I put that in quotes, of the city council.
Right.
And the city council was, I can't remember, 8 people, I think. And they had staffs. I mean, they had full offices and all of that. And I watched how they maneuvered with each other, you know, and that's only 5 people or 8 people. That isn't 98. And the thing that I thought was interesting, and I'm just throwing this out because it's always been very interesting to me. There was a point at which somebody, I think someone dropped off the council to run for mayor, I think is what it was. I don't remember. And so someone else stepped in, a brand new young woman stepped in. And everybody was so excited because, oh, she would not do this and she would not do that. And she, you know, she's pure and yada, 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 that kind of stuff. It didn't take long before she knew exactly how to play the game. And I think that kind of turned a lot of people off because they didn't think she could do that. So I'm impressed that you stuck it out and continued, because I can't imagine how you figure all the ins and outs and the rules and the, you know, just even how one creates a bill and all of that. It just is beyond, it's pretty tough.
It is complicated. And I guess I'll say, you know, to your point of like, how do you even get into it? And I will say the political climate is far more polarized and uncivil than it was. You know, when I ran this last time, it was a very different political environment than it was when I ran for mayor in 2017. It is a very different time. And our norms around how we engage with each other are very fragile and eroded. I mean, honestly, very eroded. And so that there is not an easy answer around how we protect. And I want to be careful about like civility. I'm deliberately not using that word because conflict matters. And, you know, particularly as a white person, I don't ever want to be in a position where I'm, you know, critiquing how someone else engages.
Right.
But there are norms around how we engage on a human level, and those are eroding. And I think COVID and isolation has had a lot to do with that. Obviously, social media and disinformation and the Republican Party being emboldened to lose any sense of, you know, of civility. And but the other part of that, though, is the Congressional Republican Party uses the rules to their advantage. They play power in our federal government in a way that Democrats don't. And we are in a place now where Roe v. Wade is getting rolled back because they have played power politics in a way that Democrats have not been able to.
Absolutely.
A lot of other factors, media consolidation, money in politics, you know, gerrymandering, like there are very real systemic problems with the rules that suppress people's engagement, particularly young people, people of color's engagement in our process, poor people. That matters a lot and it's very real. But my kind of working observation right now around Roe v. Wade is that the Republicans engaged on rewriting the rules so that
Right.
the playing field would have an outcome that they wanted. And we fought on the policy front in that particular front, and we have lost for now.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a grim place. We should have another question, but the part about using the rules and needing to be attentive to using power and privilege to write better rules, and using the tools of political advocacy to write better rules. And by better rules, I mean so that everyone gets to participate and have agency in their lives around how we make decisions, really matters. And we need to use our political capital to write better rules, more
Thank you.
inclusive rules. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Is that it? Nobody else has questions?
Other questions? I'll take another one. Anyone else?
Well, I will just, this is Jeannie again. I'll just say, I live in a very small town. And since 2016 in particular, I can't believe what's happened, and I, for one, dropped out of civic activity because I simply couldn't handle it anymore. And I think that's happening to a lot of people. And it's distressing. I mean, listening to you, I'm going, well, maybe I ought to give it another try. But it is a small town, and it is a little bit different, I think. Everybody sees everybody, everybody knows everybody, and it's a little different. It's a slightly different.
And people are very polarized. We are far less willing to hear each other than we were. Again, I don't mean we generally, because I think the Republicans have been in a cold civil war for many years now. So it's complicated. I guess I'm going to take that back and say that it's very complicated, but there's no doubt that there is a lot of polarization, and it feels different engaging. And that democracy requires a kind of norm. It requires fact-based debate. It requires a common understanding of the truth. It requires an engagement that allows diversity of viewpoint, but not so far in our diversity of viewpoint that we allow anti-Semitic, anti-LGBTQ, anti-Asian, anti-Black, anti-women. There's a realm of discourse that is fundamentally about diminishing others' humanity, and that has to be off limits, and we have to be okay with saying that. And those norms are the things that have eroded and made it really a different thing to engage now than it was 4 and 5 years ago.
I agree. Thank you.
Okay, if there are no more questions, I just really appreciate getting to talk to all of you. And this is actually a chance for me to workshop a little bit of how I'm thinking about these things. So I really appreciate the chance to try some of this out, and hope to stay in dialogue with all of you. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you very much, Jessyn. I'm going to interrupt your escape and just ask you to spend a couple of minutes telling us what you're doing now.
Okay, great. I have a really amazing job where I am running the City of Seattle's Office of Sustainability and Environment. And there are a lot of people in the city who are working on climate. And I get to wake up every day and think about and then put into action how we are going to scale our climate response. And because it's go time on this. We don't have any time to waste. And the good news is, as I've kind of assessed what the city is doing, we are doing many of the right things, but it is now time to scale them to the size of the crisis. So to take the pilot projects on things that we're doing that are really good, but to go big. And I can give an example. For example, we are working on a project to electrify 15 drayage trucks. And drayage trucks are those really dirty diesel trucks that do the short hauling between the port and the logistics facility, whether it's BNSF or a facility. And they're very, very diesel intensive, particulate intensive, and they have a really terrible impact on those port adjacent neighborhoods like South Park, Duwamish, Georgetown. And the community has been calling for years and years and years to clean these trucks up. So we are doing a pilot project to electrify 15 of these trucks. That is awesome. However, there are 1,000 of these trucks that idle on our city streets. So we need to learn from this pilot really quickly so that we can go from 15 to 1,000. So that's an example of what we need to be doing and doing quickly and well.
It's like, it's kind of like developing a vaccine for COVID so fast.
We can do things. We can do big things when we are diligent and relentless and put the resources into it. And that's where I think we are with climate. I can give other examples of projects and programs that we're doing that are like that are absolutely the right thing to be doing. And we need to learn quickly and go big. So that's what I get to think about and do and act on. It's a really great place to be.
Yay for you and yay for us.
Thank you again.
Jessyn, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for being the great public servant that you are. And for being the mirror that I can look into and see ways that I could be braver, frankly. All right, so I am going to stop the recording. And those of you who would like to stay on and just visit, why, feel free to do so. And otherwise, a good night to you all. Let's see here, stop recording. Good night to you, your kids, and your cat.
Good night. I'm going to go put everybody to bed. All right.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Night, night, Jessyn.
Night, night.